She can't just waltz into a hospital and claim my wife's suite. Karen Lockwood said it like she was declaring a law of nature, standing on my driveway in her spotless white blazer, a violation notice dangling from her manicured fingers. You think being a maintenance man gives you special treatment? Rules are rules, Ethan. The paper crinkled as she shoved it into my chest, her smile sharp enough to cut. Remove that ramp by Monday or face daily fines. I didn't move. Clara was inside, resting on the couch, 8 months pregnant and barely able to stand without the railing I'd built. I looked down at the violation notice, then back at Karen, the president of our HOA, the self-appointed queen of Willow Ridge Estates. Funny thing, Karen, I said quietly. That ramp you're so offended by? I built the same system for St. Augustine's Medical Center, the one you're pretending to donate to. Her smirk flickered. She wasn't expecting that. I stepped closer. You like that hospital's image, don't you? You post about it every week, but I designed half the safety protocols there. So maybe think twice before you tell me what's up to code. If you've ever watched someone abuse authority just because they could, stick around. This story ends with that same hospital's director doing something so legendary it made every HOA president in the county flinch. Subscribe now, because what happens next could easily happen to anyone with the wrong neighbor in power. My name's Ethan Marlowe. I'm a facilities engineer, the guy who keeps hospitals breathing when everyone else is panicking. I've spent 15 years making sure critical systems don't fail. I've seen generators die in hurricanes, oxygen lines rupture mid-surgery, and nurses cry when a fix came seconds too late. I don't scare easy. And I sure as hell don't fold when someone like Karen Lockwood threatens my family over curb appeal. That ramp was the only reason Clara could make it up our front steps without collapsing. She'd spent years trying to get pregnant. After 4 miscarriages and a round of expensive treatments, our doctor warned us. Any physical strain could trigger premature labor. So, when Karen started her campaign of petty fines, over a ramp, a parked van, solar panels, I ignored it at first. But this time, she crossed the line. It wasn't about money. It was about control. Karen needed to prove she could break me like she'd broken everyone else in Willow Ridge. The retired firefighter who got fined for an unsightly hose reel. The widowed teacher forced to repaint her porch 3 times because her shade of blue hurt property values. Each one eventually gave up. Paid the fines, stayed quiet. That's how she ruled, through exhaustion. But she picked the wrong family this time. Clara had been counting the weeks to her due date, and I'd been counting the hours of sleep between HOA notices. The ramp represented a safety, but to me, it was more than that. It was defiance carved in cedar. Every inch of that handrail meant my wife could walk without fear. Every bolt reminded me I had skills no HOA signature could erase. When Karen turned to leave, I saw the same superiority she wore at every board meeting, the same smile that said she'd already won. "You'll get your compliance letter tomorrow," she said, stepping into her Lexus. "And next time, try to keep your construction projects to yourself." I watched her drive off, the violation notice still warm in my hand. A breeze rustled the hospital logo on my van, parked neatly in the driveway. That same van had hauled ventilators through COVID lockdowns. It had carried parts that kept power flowing during blackouts. Now, according to Karen, it was a commercial eyesore. Inside, Clara's voice called weakly from the couch. Was that her again? I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket. "Yeah," I said softly. But she just made her biggest mistake yet. Because the thing about working in hospital infrastructure is, you learn every system leaves a trail, every override, every transfer, every misuse. Karen didn't know it yet, but she was about to cross from HOA politics into federal territory. And when that happened, I wouldn't need to fight her alone. I'd have the law and the truth on my side. That morning, I walked up the ramp I'd built, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my palm. It wasn't perfect, but it was solid, dependable, like the kind of justice Karen thought didn't exist anymore. I looked back at her Lexus disappearing down the street, and I made myself a quiet promise. The next time she used her power to hurt my family, she'd answer to someone far higher than me. By the next morning, the first fine arrived like clockwork. An envelope taped to my mailbox with the Willow Ridge HOA seal pressed into the corner. Violation number 214B, non-conforming structure and improper vehicle storage. 2 separate infractions, 2 separate fees. I didn't even open it. I already knew how this game worked. They wrote the rules, then bent them until they snapped. Clara was asleep upstairs, her breathing shallow but even. I left the notice on the counter and drove to the hospital before dawn, hoping a few hours of real work could wash the taste of powerlessness out of my mouth. The maintenance wing of St. Augustine's was quiet that early, the hum of the HVAC and the distant beep of heart monitors forming a rhythm I trusted. Machines didn't lie. Systems didn't gossip. They failed, and you fixed them. That was the agreement. I was halfway through replacing a pressure valve when my supervisor, Ken, walked in holding a clipboard. "Marlo, you see the news?" he asked. "Your HOA is trending on the local site again. Some nonsense about community uniformity." I checked my phone. Sure enough, Karen's photo filled the screen, smiling in front of the Willow Ridge gate with the headline, "President Lockwood announces new neighborhood standards initiative." The article quoted her directly. "Our goal is to uphold the aesthetic integrity of Willow Ridge. Exceptions create chaos. Exceptions like a pregnant woman's safety ramp." That phrase, aesthetic integrity, stuck with me all morning. It was how people like Karen disguised cruelty as order. She'd convinced half the neighborhood that compliance meant pride. Those who disagreed were shamed, fined, or isolated. It wasn't just me she was targeting. It was everyone too tired to fight back. When my shift ended, I drove through Willow Ridge slowly, noticing the subtle scars her rules had left. The Smiths' handmade birdhouse was gone, the Garcia's flagpole removed. Even old Mr. Patel's rose trellis had vanished, replaced by an HOA-approved lattice identical to everyone else's. Uniform perfection. Manufactured peace. Clara was sitting on the porch when I pulled up, the afternoon light soft on her face. She had a blanket draped over her legs and one hand resting protectively on her stomach. "You're early," she said, smiling faintly. "I saw the article," I told her, setting my tools down. "She's turning the whole place into her stage." Clara sighed. "She won't stop until she's in control of everything." Her voice trembled slightly, and I hated that she'd learned to measure her words around stress. She'd once been full of life, painting, gardening, laughing loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Now, every HOA letter felt like a diagnosis. That night, I laid the newest violation on the kitchen table beside the others. There were 7 in total, each printed on thick paper, each signed by Karen Lockwood herself. I read through them slowly, looking for patterns. That's when something clicked, the codes, the reference numbers. Each citation used an internal classification, 214B, 3WC, 410D. They weren't random. They followed a sequence, like someone was repurposing old inspection forms for new fines. I'd seen similar codes before, in hospital maintenance logs. They were state regulation references. If Karen was filing violations under outdated state codes, she was submitting fraudulent reports to the HOA management company. That meant every fine issued under those codes could be invalidated by oversight review. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a thread. I opened my laptop and started digging. Willow Ridge was registered under a corporate management firm called Clearfield Residential Services. Their public filings listed a shared compliance officer, Karen's cousin apparently. No surprise there, but buried deeper in the website's footer was a link to their public maintenance filings with the county, standard procedure for homeowner association records. I clicked through and saw something that made me stop breathing for a second. Community safety donation, $7,500. Willow Ridge, HOA, St. Augustine's Medical Center. The date matched the same week Karen had posted her hospital gala photos. She'd used HOA funds to buy herself donor status at the hospital, where she later took Clara's reserved suite. That's when it hit me. This wasn't personal spite anymore. It was a pattern of fraud. And if I could prove a link between the HOA's money and Karen's fake donations, it wouldn't just be an ethics issue. It would be a state investigation. I closed the laptop quietly as Clara stirred upstairs. Outside, the manicured lawns glowed under the streetlights, each house lined up like soldiers in a quiet, obedient army. But for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had kept everyone silent was gone. In its place was focus. Karen had her aesthetic integrity. I had something better, evidence. And soon, She'd learned that the same systems she manipulated could be the ones that brought her down. The next morning, Clara insisted I take her to the hospital for her weekly checkup. She hated going alone, and after last night's discovery, I didn't want her anywhere near Karen's orbit without me. As I helped her into the van, I noticed Karen's Lexus parked 2 houses down, idling. She didn't even bother pretending she wasn't watching. Her window rolled down just enough for her sunglasses to catch the sun. Then she smiled and waved. It wasn't a greeting, it was a warning. At St. Augustine's, the air was crisp with antiseptic and recycled coolness. Familiar, sterile, safe, or it used to be. I'd walked these corridors for 12 years, fixing what broke, keeping the lights steady through storms. But today, even the polished floors felt different, like the building itself was holding its breath. Clara was in good hands with the maternity staff. While she went in for her vitals, I wandered toward the upper floor where the administrative offices sat behind frosted glass. I wasn't supposed to be there during patient hours, but my badge still worked. Curiosity and anger make a dangerous mix when you're used to seeing systems from the inside. Through the glass, I spotted Dr. Miles Grafton, Deputy Director of Facilities and my indirect superior. He was in his early 50s, tall, precise, and usually calm to the point of indifference. But this morning, he wasn't calm. He stood behind his desk, gripping a file so tight his knuckles were white, his jaw working like he was swallowing words he couldn't say. A woman from accounting hovered nearby, whispering urgently. When she left, I knocked lightly on the frame. He looked up, startled. "Ethan," he said, his tone polite but cautious, "you're not scheduled for this floor today." "I know," I said, stepping in, "but I think we both saw the same thing on the HOA site yesterday. Karen Lockwood's little donor initiative." He stiffened, eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." I set my hands on the chair in front of his desk, leaning just enough to make him listen. The donation listed from Willow Ridge HOA, $7.5 grand processed through your office. She used HOA funds to buy donor status. That money came from neighborhood dues. He didn't answer. He rubbed his temple with one hand, the other still clutching the file. "You shouldn't be looking into that," he said finally, but his voice wavered. "She used it to take my wife's hospital suite miles." My words came out sharper than I intended. "Suite 4A, the one you signed off on last month for maintenance authorization." His grip on the file slipped, a paper fluttering to the floor. He bent to pick it up, but his hands trembled. The gesture gave him away, an instinctive flinch, not from guilt, but from knowing he'd been dragged into something rotten. "I didn't reassign that room," he said after a long pause. "I approved temporary access for a donor's event. Karen said it was for a hospital outreach, public relations, nothing more. The next thing I knew, she was checked in as a patient under medical exhaustion. She told staff she had board authorization. By the time I found out, she was already moved into 4A. "So you knew," I said quietly. He looked away, his shoulders collapsing an inch. "I suspected, but she's on every local committee, Ethan. Chamber of Commerce, zoning, HOA, real estate board. She's got connections in the city permit office and the hospital foundation. You go after her, you don't just risk your job, you risk your reputation." That was the truth I hadn't wanted to hear. Miles wasn't corrupt. He was scared. He'd spent decades climbing the administrative ladder, building credibility one cautious decision at a time. Now, one manipulative woman with a donor badge had him cornered. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You know how this system works. Every donor override leaves a log. You didn't make the reassignment, but your credentials did. That means someone accessed your account remotely. That's a breach, Miles, a federal one." His eyes flicked up sharply. Fear and relief battled across his face. "You're certain?" I checked the metadata. The access came from an external IP, her office router at Willow Ridge. I can prove it. He sank into his chair, exhaling through his hands. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The hum of the overhead vent filled the silence. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his expression. Not resignation, but the slow burn of conscience waking up. "I'll review the logs," he said finally, voice steadying. "But Ethan, if you're right, this goes beyond HOA politics. This is state oversight territory." "That's exactly where I want it," I said. As I turned to leave, I saw his reflection in the glass wall, head bowed, hand pressed to his mouth, shoulders tense. The body language of a man torn between duty and fear. He wasn't my enemy, not yet, but he was the crack in Karen's armor, and if he found his courage before she found out, that crack would widen fast. Outside, I saw Clara through the maternity window, smiling faintly at the nurse as she listened to the baby's heartbeat. For a moment, everything inside me steadied. Miles might be scared, but I wasn't, and if he decided to stay silent, I'd speak loudly enough for both of us. By the time I wheeled Clara out of the hospital that afternoon, the sun was already slipping behind the sycamores. She looked tired but peaceful, clutching a small ultrasound printout like it was armor against everything waiting back home. I tried to smile for her sake, but the tension in my chest was a constant pulse. I'd seen the fear in Dr. Grafton's eyes, and I knew what it meant. Karen Lockwood had people scared of her in places they shouldn't be. When we turned onto Willow Ridge Drive, the illusion of peace shattered. Cars lined both sides of the street near the community center, and a banner stretched across the entry. Willow Ridge Emergency HOA Meeting. Attendance mandatory. I recognized the handwriting on the notice nailed to our mailbox. Karen's. She'd called an unscheduled meeting while we were gone. "Just go inside," Clara said softly. "Don't let her drag you into it tonight." I kissed her forehead, helped her up the ramp, and waited until the door locked behind her. Then I looked back at the glow spilling from the center's windows. There was no avoiding it. If Karen wanted a public show, she'd get one. Inside, the air was thick with perfume and resentment. Every chair was filled, every whisper sharp. Karen stood at the front, perfectly staged, pearls, pastel blazer, clipboard in hand. Beside her, the vice president scrolled through a PowerPoint titled, "Community Preservation and Rule Integrity." "Oh, Ethan," she chirped, loud enough for everyone to turn. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the issue of non-compliance regarding your property." Murmurs rippled through the room. I saw familiar faces, neighbors who used to wave now staring at their laps. On the far wall, a slideshow displayed photos of my home, the ramp, my van, even a zoom shot of Clara sitting outside. "This," Karen continued, pointing with her laser pen, "is an example of how exceptions can erode community standards. Unauthorized structures, commercial signage, and visible equipment. We must maintain consistency for the sake of property values." A man in the second row raised his hand. "Karen, his wife's pregnant. That ramp's temporary, right?" Karen's smile didn't falter. "Pregnancy is not a legal exemption from architectural guidelines, Mr. Dean. Our policies are clear." The words hit me like a punch. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was erasing empathy. That was her power, convincing good people that cruelty was order. I took a slow breath. "You're quoting outdated policy," I said evenly. "The Accessibility Amendment was passed in 2021. Section 4B allows temporary medical structures if the homeowner provides notice, which I did. Twice." Her smile flickered for half a second before she recovered. "That notice was incomplete." "No," I said, stepping forward. "It was ignored." She folded her arms. "You think you can challenge the board, Ethan? You're one homeowner. I represent 77. The crowd went still. That was her stage tactic. Force isolation, then exploit silence. But I wasn't the same man she fined 2 weeks ago. I'd spent my day in a hospital learning how deep her reach went. "You know what's funny, Karen?" I said. "You keep preaching integrity, but I found something on the state registry this morning. Willow Ridge HOA made a $7,500 donation to St. Augustine's Medical Center, the same week you posted photos from your so-called donor gala." Her head snapped up. "That's irrelevant to tonight's agenda." "It's completely relevant," I countered, "because that money came from community funds, my funds. Everyone's here. So maybe they should know their dues went to a hospital you used for your own benefit." A few gasps broke through the tension. One woman whispered, "She did what?" Karen's jaw tightened. "You're misinformed." "Then clarify it," I said. "Because I work there. I saw the transfer record myself." Her expression hardened into something almost feral. "This meeting is adjourned." She tried to grab her clipboard and storm out, but people began murmuring louder, questioning, doubting. The seed was planted. Even her allies looked uneasy. I didn't need proof tonight. I just needed to crack her facade. As the crowd dispersed, I caught a glimpse of Dr. Grafton near the back of the room. He He must have come out of curiosity or guilt. His hands were jammed in his pockets, shoulders hunched, eyes darting between Karen and me. When our gazes met, he gave a single tight nod. He'd heard enough. Outside, the air was cold and metallic, rain threatening in the distance. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Meet tomorrow after shift. We need to talk." MG. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, heart steady for the first time all day. The victory strategy was forming itself, one fracture at a time. She wanted compliance. I was building a case. And now, someone on the inside was ready to help me pull the thread that would unravel her empire. The next morning, rain hammered the windshield so hard it felt like the world was trying to rinse itself clean. Clara sat beside me, one hand over her belly, the other gripping the edge of the seat. Her contractions had started just after sunrise, short, irregular, but enough to push every ounce of fear I'd been holding straight to the surface. I drove fast but careful, the hospital rising ahead like a fortress in the storm. She squeezed my hand. "Ethan, what if something goes wrong?" "Nothing's going wrong," I said, voice steady even though my chest was a fist. "We're getting the suite, the one we planned for, I promise." Suite 4A, her safe room, the one I'd helped design. A small private corner of the maternity wing where the lighting was soft and the filtration system was hospital-grade perfection. I'd spent weeks installing its modular ducts, making sure not a single wire hummed out of place. Clara deserved that kind of peace. But when we arrived, the front desk clerk frowned at the computer. "I'm sorry, Mr. Marlowe," she said, avoiding my eyes. "That suite's occupied." My breath caught. "Occupied? It's been reserved for months, under my name." "Yes, I see that," she said, tapping nervously. "But it was reassigned this morning under emergency authorization. A donor priority case." The word hit me like a slap. Donor. My throat went dry. "Who?" "I'm not authorized to disclose that." But I didn't need her to. Down the hall, through the glass of the suite's viewing window, I saw her, Karen Lockwood, sitting upright on the hospital bed, surrounded by flowers, sipping bottled mineral water like she was at a spa. A hospital bracelet hung loose on her wrist. Clara followed my gaze. Her voice cracked. "Is that—" "Yeah," I whispered. "It's her." Karen spotted us. She smiled, lifted a manicured hand, and gave a mock little wave before turning back to the nurse beside her. My pulse roared in my ears. The nurse at the desk tried to calm me, saying there was another room available, smaller, without the privacy features, but I barely heard her. Clara's breathing quickened, panic rising. "Ethan, please! Just get me somewhere safe." That broke through everything. I forced my anger down long enough to help her into the alternate suite. It smelled faintly of bleach and old air, no filtered vents, no adjustable recliner, just sterile walls and the faint hum of cheap fluorescent lighting. When the door closed behind us, Clara gripped my sleeve. "Don't do anything rash," she whispered. I knelt beside her. "She stole it, Clara. She used HOA funds to buy herself a donor badge. I can prove it." Her eyes were tired, but steady. "Then prove it after I'm safe." The labor ward filled with the sounds of life and urgency. Footsteps, beeping monitors, the distant cry of newborns. But all I heard was the echo of Karen's smug wave behind the glass. Hours passed. Clara's contractions steadied into rhythm, and I stayed by her side through every one. Between her deep breaths, I slipped into the hallway and checked the system logs from the maintenance console. My badge gave me limited access, enough to see patient room assignments and administrative overrides. Suite 4A's file glowed red with Authorization Override, Admin Level 2. I knew that code. It wasn't medical staff. It was donor access. I traced the log chain back to a username, mgraftonestagustines.org, Miles. The site made my stomach twist. It didn't fit. He wasn't corrupt. He was too cautious, too rigid. That meant his credentials had been used. Either he'd been manipulated, or she'd gotten access through his authorization channel. Either way, it was a violation of state oversight law. I printed the access summary and slipped it into my jacket pocket before anyone saw. When I returned to the room, Clara was asleep, her breathing slow, her hand resting over the printout of our baby's heartbeat. I brushed her hair from her face and sat in the dim glow of the monitor, the paper burning against my chest. Karen Lockwood had crossed from neighborhood tyranny into medical fraud. That made this bigger than HOA bylaws. It was state territory. And this time, I had the first piece of proof. Outside the window, lightning flashed over the parking lot, illuminating her Lexus in the reserved donor space. I stared at it until my reflection disappeared from the glass. By morning, I'd take this to someone who could make it matter. Someone inside the hospital system who understood what it meant when donor privileges turned into blackmail. And if Karen thought stealing my wife's suite was her victory, she was about to learn what happens when the man she underestimated builds the systems that keep her world running. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the hospital parking lot still glistened like glass. I hadn't slept. I sat in my van, the printout of the system logs folded neatly in my pocket, watching staff trickle in for their morning shifts. Every minute that passed made what I was about to do heavier. I wasn't just exposing a corrupt HOA president anymore. I was about to challenge my own workplace, my own chain of command. At 7:42 a.m., I walked into the hospital's administrative wing, past the framed donor plaques and motivational slogans that suddenly felt like jokes. The air smelled of coffee and polished linoleum. My ID badge beeped green at the scanner outside Dr. Miles Grafton's office. He looked up as I entered, startled but not surprised. He must have expected this. His tie was crooked, his eyes shadowed like he hadn't slept either. "Ethan," he said quietly, motioning me inside. "I heard about what happened with your wife. I'm sorry." Sorry doesn't change the fact that she stole my room. My voice came out harder than intended. "And she used your credentials to do it." He flinched. I dropped the folded log sheet onto his desk. He stared at it for a long moment before opening it, eyes scanning line by line. His jaw clenched when he reached the access timestamp. "That override shouldn't exist," he muttered. "Admin level 2 requires two-factor verification. No one outside the system should have that ability." "She does," I said, "because she's been playing both sides." Karen used Willow Ridge's HOA funds as fake hospital donations. That money bought her donor access and the right to demand privileges she doesn't qualify for. You didn't reassign that suite, Miles. She hijacked your credentials through the donor portal. He rubbed his temple, breathing slow, deliberate. If what you're saying is true, this isn't just a misuse of funds. It's a compliance breach under State Regulation 58B. That's mandatory reporting territory. "That's exactly why I came here," I said. "We need to file it before she covers her tracks." Miles looked at me, shoulders stiffening under the weight of an impossible choice. "You realize what that means for me?" he said quietly. "I'm responsible for every override under my access key. If this goes public, the board will assume I leaked it. My career, my license, it could all go down before the truth surfaces." His hands were shaking slightly, the paper trembling between his fingers. It wasn't fear of guilt. It was fear of consequence. The kind that turns good men into silent ones. I leaned forward. "You've built this place with integrity, Miles. You don't protect corruption. You expose it. And I'll stand beside you when you do." He met my gaze for a long time, then exhaled sharply like he'd been holding that breath for years. "There's an internal compliance liaison," he said finally. "She reports directly to the hospital director. If I initiate a flag, it'll trigger an audit from the Department of Health Facilities Oversight. But once it's submitted, there's no pulling it back." "Good," I said. "That's exactly what we need." He hesitated, then reached into his drawer and pulled out his tablet. His fingers hovered above the screen before typing a short access command. I watched as the hospital's internal portal loaded. Facility Oversight Review, Donor Access Irregularity Report. He entered the override code, attached the access log, and paused at the final confirmation screen. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. "Once I hit this," he said, "it becomes official record. The state will have jurisdiction within 72 hours. "Then hit it," I said. He did. The screen flashed green. "Submission complete. Case ID 51129. Miles sat back, exhaling hard. "You just lit a fuse, Ethan. When oversight starts pulling threads, she'll know it came from us." "I'm counting on it," I said. "She thrives on silence. Let's see how she does under investigation." As I left his office, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. Not gone, but focused. The system was in motion now, and for once it wasn't working in her favor. Outside, the morning light filtered through thin clouds. I stopped by the waiting area before heading back to Clara's room. She was sitting up, smiling faintly as a nurse adjusted her blanket. "You look like you've made up your mind," she said softly. "I have," I said. "We're not fighting her anymore. The state is." For the first time in weeks, I saw her relax fully, her hand tracing the rhythm of the baby's movement beneath her gown. Hope flickered behind her eyes. Down the hall, a hospital announcement echoed through the intercom. "All administrative personnel, please report to Compliance Conference Room B." It was starting already. Karen Lockwood had spent months turning her influence into armor. But now, buried under the hum of this building, a quiet machine had awakened. One built on protocol, not politics. And I just handed it her name. The next day, the hospital felt different. Still polished, still busy, but quieter in a way only insiders could sense. Something beneath the surface had shifted. Nurses whispered in the corridors, admin staff avoided eye contact, and the security officer stationed near the elevators watched every badge swipe twice. The oversight report had landed. I could feel it humming through the walls like a hidden current. I spent the morning with Clara, pretending everything was normal. She was stable now, though her contractions still came and went like warnings. Every few minutes, she'd reach for my hand, and I'd squeeze back, grounding both of us. But under that calm, my mind was spinning. If the oversight investigators were coming, I needed to make sure the right story reached them first. And that meant Miles had to stop hiding behind protocol. Just after lunch, I got a message from him. "Meet me on the roof. 10 minutes. The rooftop access door was heavy, the metal handle cold from the November wind. I stepped into the sunlight, squinting against the glare of the city below. Miles stood near the ledge, his coat pulled tight, his tie fluttering in the breeze. He didn't turn when I approached. "She knows," he said quietly. "Karen called me this morning, said she's heard whispers of a compliance issue tied to her donation. She wants to meet with the hospital board privately." I stopped beside him. "That was fast." "She's connected," he said bitterly. "The foundation chair owes her favors from her real estate business. She's already spinning it like she's the victim of a clerical error." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, his posture tight, the way a man looks when he's been cornered but hasn't yet decided which wall to push back against. "Ethan, before this goes any further, you need to know something. I've been sitting on information I should have reported weeks ago." I waited. He stared at the skyline for a long moment before speaking again. "Karen approached me months ago, right after she was elected HOA president. She said she was planning a community partnership with St. Augustine's, fundraisers, donation drives, local sponsorships. It sounded legitimate. She wanted the hospital to recognize Willow Ridge as an official donor community." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "I thought it was harmless PR, but then she asked for donor-level privileges, a personalized access card, event invites, the works. I told her we couldn't authorize that without board approval. 2 days later, I got an email from the foundation chair approving it. The signature looked real. I didn't question it." "So she forged her own pathway in," I said. Miles nodded. "And I let her. I didn't look closely enough because it benefited the hospital's public image. The first donation cleared, then another. 3 total, all between $5,000 and $8,000. Everyone came from a Willow Ridge HOA account under the label Community Beautification Initiative. I felt the wind cut across the roof, cold and sharp. That means she laundered HOA money directly into personal status. She didn't just misuse funds, she embezzled them. His shoulders slumped. "Yes, and I have the receipts. I kept copies of every transfer, every email. I told myself I was protecting the hospital in case things went sideways. But what I was really doing was protecting myself from the fallout." He turned to face me fully for the first time, eyes bloodshot and heavy with guilt. "You were right, Ethan. She used my credentials. The donor system uses a secondary key, mine. I checked the network logs after we filed the report. The override for Suite 4A came from her IP address, but it was authorized through my dual token. She somehow cloned it. Probably through the remote access permission I granted her for that community app she insisted we test. That detail made my stomach tighten. "You gave her remote access to the donor platform?" He nodded once, grim. "It was a trial portal for neighborhood outreach. I didn't realize she had tech support reconfigure it to mimic an internal admin console. She must have had help. The confession hung between us, stark and final. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I wanted to believe she just wanted recognition for the community. But now the oversight division has the same files I do. They'll connect the dots in days, and when they do, her entire operation, hospital ties, HOA accounts, tax records, will fall apart." He pulled a small flash drive from his coat pocket and held it out. "Everything's on here. Proof of her misuse of funds, forged approvals, donor access requests. If the investigators come to you, show them this. It's the only way to make sure the truth doesn't get buried under her lies." I took the drive and closed my hand around it. "You just did the right thing, Miles." He shook his head. "No," he said softly. "I'm just finally doing what I should have done before she hurt your family." As he walked away, the weight in my palm felt heavier than metal. It wasn't just evidence. It was a confession wrapped in courage, and with it, the quiet machine I'd set in motion now had its power source. I didn't go home that night. The storm clouds over the city had cleared, but I stayed parked outside the hospital, staring at the small flash drive on the passenger seat. Miles's confession had changed everything. The oversight review was already in motion, but now I had something even stronger, a full record of Karen's crimes from inside the system she thought she owned. It was the leverage I needed to bring her down publicly, not quietly. At 8:30 a.m., I walked through the revolving doors of St. Augustine's again, this time not as an engineer or a husband, but as a man preparing for war. Clara was resting upstairs, stable, under observation. I'd told her I was heading to maintenance. I didn't tell her I was about to turn our quiet struggle into something much bigger. The hospital's boardroom was on the 12th floor, a space I'd never had reason to enter. The hallway leading to it was lined with portraits of past directors and donors, each one smiling in bronze and mahogany like saints of self-importance. At the end of the hall stood Evelyn Sharp, the hospital's compliance liaison, mid-40s, precise, unreadable. She'd been the one to receive the oversight alert from Miles's submission. "Mr. Marlowe," she greeted coolly as I approached. "Dr. Grafton informed me you had supporting materials relevant to Case 51129." I handed her the flash drive. "That contains proof the HOA president, Karen Lockwood, used fraudulent hospital donations to access donor privileges, including the administrative override for Suite 4A. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her fingers tighten slightly around the drive. "You're certain of the chain of evidence?" "Every timestamp's there," I said. Miles's confession, financial logs, emails, and the donor key replication he traced to her IP. "It's airtight." She nodded slowly. "Then you should prepare for fallout. When this surfaces, it won't just be her reputation at stake. The hospital board will want answers about how she infiltrated donor access at all. I don't care about the hospital's embarrassment," I said. "I care that she hurt my wife and used my community's money to do it." Evelyn studied me for a moment longer, then turned toward the door. "You'll be contacted when the audit report finalizes. I suggest you stay reachable." As she left, I caught my reflection in the polished boardroom window. I didn't look like a man who fixed pipes and wires for a living anymore. I looked like someone who'd stopped fixing and started dismantling. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. "You think you're clever, Ethan? I know what you and Miles did. My lawyer will handle this. Tell your wife to stay quiet if she values peace. KL." I stared at the screen until my pulse slowed. She knew. And if she was threatening Clara, she was panicking. That meant the investigation was closing in faster than she expected. That evening, I stopped by the community park, a stretch of manicured green that had once been Willow Ridge's pride. Now it was nearly empty, the air heavy with unease. A few neighbors were gathered under the pavilion, whispering. When I approached, conversations stopped. "You really going after her?" one of them asked quietly, a retired veteran named Howard. "She's been bullying folks here for years, but nobody's ever fought back." "I'm not just going after her," I said. "The state is. And when they're done, every illegal fine she's ever issued gets wiped clean." Howard exhaled like he'd been holding it for months. Another neighbor, a young mother named Lila, stepped forward. If you need statements about the HOA fund withdrawals, I'll testify. She took money from our maintenance reserve to pay for her landscaping. I have the invoices. It spread from there. Voices rising, stories spilling, fines for fences, threats for paint colors, harassment letters. One by one, people started talking. What had been a neighborhood of silence turned into a small, growing crowd of witnesses. I took out my notebook and began jotting details, dates, transaction numbers, witness names. It wasn't just about the hospital anymore. It was about the entire community Karen had exploited. By the time the streetlights flickered on, I had 6 signatures and 3 sworn statements ready for the oversight investigators. Proof that Karen's corruption reached far beyond a stolen suite. It was a pattern of abuse and financial misconduct spanning years. I drove home under the hum of the highway, adrenaline still sharp in my veins. Clara was awake when I entered, propped up with her laptop, watching an online live stream from a local news station. "Ethan," she said softly, pointing at the screen, "they're talking about her." The anchor's voice was steady, professional. "Breaking, state health oversight officials have initiated an investigation into alleged donor access manipulation at St. Augustine's Medical Center. Sources claim the inquiry involves funds linked to the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association." Karen's photo flashed across the screen, smiling, poised, perfect. The caption beneath it read, "Local HOA president under investigation for misuse of funds." Clara looked at me, tears welling, but mixed with something else. Relief. "You did it." "No," I said quietly, watching the headline fade into the next segment. "We did it. Miles, me, every neighbor she ever bullied. We just started the avalanche." Outside our window, the wind rustled the maple leaves lining the street. For the first time in months, Willow Ridge felt like it was breathing again. The silence she'd built her power on was cracking, and underneath it, truth was finally making noise. By morning, the story had spread beyond our county. Local stations replayed the same footage on loop, Karen Lockwood smiling at ribbon cuttings, standing behind donation checks, shaking hands, with hospital board members. The news anchors spoke in calm tones, but the message underneath was explosive. The state had officially confirmed a compliance investigation. What they didn't know yet was that I was the one who'd set the fuse. I dropped Clara off for her follow-up appointment, then drove straight to the county courthouse. It was time to put everything in writing. Every fraudulent HOA fine, every threat, every forged notice. The same system she'd used to intimidate me was about to be turned into her paper trail. Inside, the clerk's office smelled of toner and old carpet. A man in a navy vest looked up from his monitor. "Can I help you, sir?" "I need to file a resident grievance and financial complaint," I said, setting my folder on the counter. "It concerns the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association and its president, Karen Lockwood." He blinked, recognition dawning. "You're the guy from the news, aren't you?" "Yeah," I said. "But I'm not done yet." He nodded solemnly and handed me the forms. For the next hour, I filled in every box, every date, every infraction Karen had ever written against me. I attached photos, invoices, screenshots, proof that she'd twisted the rules for profit and revenge. When I finished, my hand ached, but it was a good ache. It felt like the end of submission. As I walked out into the courthouse plaza, my phone buzzed. It was Miles. "They've frozen her donor access. She's calling everyone. Board, foundation, even legal. She's panicking." "Good," I texted back. "Let her panic." But it wasn't enough to just tear her down. The neighborhood needed protection too. That evening, I met with a small group of residents at Howard's garage, the same people who'd given me their statements. The air smelled like motor oil and damp concrete, but it felt like the first real community meeting in months. "She's going to call an emergency HOA session," Lila said, pacing. "She always does when she feels cornered." "Let her," I said. "This time, we'll be ready." I laid out the plan. The Oversight Division's report will go public in 48 hours. But before that happens, I want every neighbor here to sign a collective motion of no confidence. It's not just symbolic, it's procedural. If we get more than 50% of the community's signatures, the state auditor can temporarily suspend the HOA's board under Clause 12 of our charter. Howard whistled low. "You really did your homework." "I've had a lot of motivation," I said. For the next 2 hours, we organized. Lila managed digital signatures through the resident portal. Howard printed copies for the older homeowners who preferred paper. I drafted the letterhead, making it as professional as any official document Karen had ever flaunted. By the end of the night, we had 38 verified signatures, just shy of the majority we needed. The next morning, I went door to door. Some neighbors were hesitant, scared of retaliation, but most were ready. Karen had fined them for everything from wind chimes to mailbox paint. Each story was another scar, another reason to stand together. By sunset, the motion had 61 signatures. That evening, I sent the full file, petition, complaint copies, and the flash drive evidence to Evelyn Sharp at the hospital, CCing the Oversight Division and the County Auditor's Office. My message was simple. Attached is supporting documentation showing that Willow Ridge HOA funds were systematically misappropriated under President Lockwood's authority. We, the residents, request an immediate audit suspension pending your ongoing investigation. An hour later, I received a reply. Mr. Marlowe, your submission aligns with current findings. Investigators will attend the next HOA board meeting to ensure procedural transparency. Do not alert the board beforehand. I leaned back in my chair, a slow satisfaction spreading through me. After months of intimidation, silence, and sleepless nights, the tables had turned completely. She'd built her power on secrecy. Now her downfall would be televised. The next day, the notice appeared on every mailbox in Willow Ridge. Emergency HOA meeting, mandatory attendance. Karen hadn't wasted time, but neither had I. When the evening came, the community center parking lot overflowed. Residents lined the walls, whispering, filming, waiting. Karen stood at the front, her usual poise cracking under the strain. She began her speech, defensive, rehearsed, desperate. Then, right on cue, 2 men in suits walked in, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. State Oversight Division. Behind them, Evelyn Sharp from the hospital followed, holding a thick binder. The whispers stopped. Karen froze mid-sentence. I stood near the back of the room, Clara beside me, her hand resting on her belly. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The investigation had arrived exactly where it needed to. Inside the room, she'd ruled through fear. When one of the officials announced the audit commencement, the crowd erupted, not in anger, but in relief. For the first time, Willow Ridge had witnesses who weren't afraid of her title. Karen's face drained of color. Her power wasn't slipping. It was gone. And as the cameras from the local news turned toward the crowd, I finally understood what victory felt like when it came from truth instead of revenge. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Voices clashed over each other, neighbors whispering, phones recording, Karen shouting about procedural violations. The state investigators stayed calm, unfazed by her theatrics. One of them, a gray-haired man named Fowler, spoke with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen too many of these unravel before. Ms. Lockwood, he said, his tone level, under the Virginia Homeowner Statute, Section 13.8, you're required to surrender all association financial records when a state audit is in progress. That includes your digital correspondence and transaction history. Karen blinked, stunned, before forcing a brittle laugh. You can't just barge in here demanding files. This is private property. I'll have my attorney. Fowler interrupted without raising his voice. Ma'am, your HOA is a registered nonprofit corporation. Its financial activity falls under state jurisdiction. You've already been notified of the active investigation by the Department of Health Facilities Oversight. This is an extension of that inquiry. Her confidence cracked visibly. She looked toward her vice president, Brent, a man who suddenly found his shoes fascinating. Around her, the crowd shifted, the silence of former victims transforming into quiet satisfaction. The fear that had once filled this hall was dissolving right in front of her. I stood near the back with Clara, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. She was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from relief. For the first time, people were seeing what we'd lived through for months. Fowler opened a folder on the podium and began reading aloud. We have documentation indicating a $7,500 transfer from the Willow Ridge HOA account to St. Augustine's Medical Center under the label Community Beautification Donation. Records show that this transaction was later associated with donor access privileges under your name, Ms. Lockwood. Karen's face turned ashen. That donation was approved by the board. Correction, Fowler said smoothly. The board minutes from that date do not record any such motion, nor do the bylaws permit discretionary spending over $2,000 without membership vote. The audience murmured louder now, several residents gasping. I caught Howard's eye across the room. He nodded once, that subtle veteran's nod of respect. Karen gripped the edge of the table, her nails whitening against the wood. "You're twisting this," she snapped. "That money went to charity, to support our hospital." At that, Evelyn Sharp, the hospital liaison, stepped forward. Her calmness was surgical. "Ms. Lockwood, I represent St. Augustine's Compliance Division. The hospital's donor registry shows you listed as a private benefactor. Your privileges were granted based on verified contribution, which, as of this audit, appears to have originated from HOA community funds. You then used those privileges to request administrative override of Suite 4A, the maternity suite reserved under the name of Ethan and Clara Marlowe. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again, the fight draining out of her like air from a punctured tire. "Is this true?" one of the residents called out. She turned toward the crowd, desperate now. "You don't understand. These systems are complicated. I didn't take anything from anyone." I stepped forward then, voice calm but clear enough for everyone to hear. "You didn't just take a hospital suite. You took our peace. You made every family here believe they were powerless. But power doesn't come from fear, Karen. It comes from accountability." Fowler looked at me, then back at her. "For the record, Ms. Lockwood, you are hereby relieved of your duties as HOA president pending the outcome of the audit. You are required to turn over all records within 24 hours. The neighbors erupted in applause, loud, cathartic, raw. Karen stood frozen, her face flushing with humiliation, as the investigators began collecting binders and digital drives from the board table. Brent quietly removed his nameplate and walked out the side door without a word. Clara leaned against me, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said softly, watching the investigators seal evidence bags. "We all did." As the meeting adjourned, Fowler approached me privately. "Mr. Marlowe, your cooperation made this possible. The Department of Health Facilities Oversight and the State Auditor's Office will finalize their report within 72 hours. Once it's public, restitution hearings will begin. She'll be facing both civil and criminal charges." I nodded, every muscle in my body finally unclenching. That's all I needed to hear. Outside, the night air felt alive. The streetlights reflected on rain-slick pavement, and for the first time, Willow Ridge didn't feel suffocating. It felt clean. Neighbors gathered in small circles, talking, laughing, even hugging. The fear that had once ruled this place was gone. As Clara and I walked home, she squeezed my hand. "What happens next?" "Now," I said, looking at the quiet houses lined in a row of newfound peace. "Now we rebuild." But even as I said it, I knew the story wasn't over. Because tomorrow, when the full report went public, Karen Lockwood wouldn't just lose her title, she'd lose the mask she'd built her life behind. And that would be the moment the whole town finally saw what we'd seen all along. Power doesn't belong to those who demand it. It belongs to those who earn it. By the next afternoon, Willow Ridge was the center of a media storm. News vans lined the entrance, reporters holding umbrellas against the drizzle, as camera lights flashed over the brick archway that once felt like a gate of privilege. Now, it looked like a crime scene. The state's audit report had gone public at sunrise, and the headlines hit harder than anyone expected. HOA president diverts community funds for personal gain. Clara watched from our porch as I tightened my tie. She was pale but smiling, her strength steadier than mine. "You don't have to go," she said softly. "You've already won." I shook my head. "Not until they hear it from us." The community meeting had been scheduled for 6 p.m., a mandatory address where the state's audit team would read their findings, but this time, it wasn't just residents attending. Half the town showed up, along with local reporters, a few hospital representatives, and even a city council liaison. The parking lot overflowed into the street. When we arrived, people were already gathered inside the community center, whispering in clusters. Some held printouts of the audit summary, others their phones open to news feeds. For the first time since moving here, I could feel something alive pulsing through this place. Unity. At the front, a temporary podium stood where Karen used to preside. The state investigators sat nearby, folders stacked neatly. The microphone crackled as Fowler, the lead investigator, stepped up. "Thank you all for your cooperation during this inquiry," he began, his tone steady and official. "The Department of Health Facilities Oversight and the State Auditor's Office have concluded that substantial evidence supports multiple counts of financial misconduct by Willow Ridge HOA President Karen Lockwood." The murmurs began immediately. Shock from those still in denial, vindication from those who'd been fined and shamed. I saw faces I hadn't seen in months, people who'd stayed silent finally showing up. Fowler continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "Funds collected from homeowners under beautification and maintenance fees were transferred to private accounts and used to secure personal benefits, including hospital donor privileges, travel accommodations, and promotional materials. Total misappropriated amount, $78,000. The number hung in the air like thunder. Karen, sitting rigidly in the front row, didn't move. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she ignored him, staring straight ahead with a smile that was more mask than face. Evelyn Sharp took the microphone next. "As a representative of St. Augustine's Medical Center, I want to clarify that the hospital was not complicit. All donor privileges associated with Ms. Lockwood's account have been revoked. Furthermore, Suite 4A has been permanently dedicated to the family whose case revealed these violations." She turned slightly toward me and Clara, who sat a few rows back. "Effective immediately, it will be known as the Marlowe Room, a symbol of integrity, fairness, and patient trust." Applause rippled through the crowd, cautious at first, then growing stronger. Clara squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening. Karen suddenly stood, her voice slicing through the noise. "You're all hypocrites," she shouted. "Every one of you enjoyed what I built, the flowers, the events, the order. You think this neighborhood ran itself?" The crowd turned. Cameras swung toward her. A few people backed away as she ranted. "I kept this place from turning into a dump, and this is how you repay me? By believing a janitor with a sob story and a pregnant wife?" Something inside me went still. I rose slowly, my voice calm, but sharp enough to cut through her chaos. "You didn't build order, Karen. You built fear. You fined retirees for wind chimes. You made families cry over mailbox colors. And you stole money from people who trusted you." The room fell silent. I stepped closer to the front. "You called me a maintenance man like it was an insult. But maintenance is what keeps things working when people like you break them." A wave of quiet applause started in the back, growing into a steady rhythm until even the reporters lowered their cameras to listen. Karen's lawyer tugged her sleeve, whispering frantically, but she jerked away. "This isn't over," she yelled. "You'll regret humiliating me." Fowler raised his hand. "Ms. Lockwood, please remain seated. The district attorney's office will be contacting you regarding charges of fraud and embezzlement. This meeting is now under state observation." She froze, the color draining from her face as the weight of real consequence finally landed. Neighbors who had once looked at their feet now stood taller. Lila spoke up from the back, her voice clear. "We're forming a new board, one that listens. We'll rebuild Willow Ridge without fear." That was it, the line that broke the spell Karen had held for years. People started clapping again, this time louder, freer. The sound filled the room like thunder breaking after a long drought. Karen sank into her seat, defeated. For once, she wasn't in control. As the crowd spilled out into the rain-soaked parking lot, Clara leaned against me. "It's really over," she whispered. I looked around, the neighbors smiling, shaking hands, hugging. "No," I said quietly. "It's finally beginning." For the first time, Willow Ridge didn't feel like her neighborhood. It felt like ours. A week later, Willow Ridge didn't look the same. The streets were quieter, calmer, like the air itself had exhaled. The news cycle had moved on to the next scandal, but in our small community, the echoes of that public reckoning still lingered in every conversation. Karen Lockwood's name had become shorthand for arrogance undone. Her Lexus was gone, her house under investigation for fraudulent reimbursements, and her former allies had melted into polite obscurity. I walked with Clara down the freshly cleaned main path, her arm linked through mine, her belly now round and firm beneath her coat. Neighbors waved as we passed. People who once pretended not to see us now smiled without hesitation. The world hadn't changed, but this little piece of it had. It was proof that order built on intimidation doesn't survive when people start speaking together instead of alone. Near the entrance to the neighborhood, the once pristine HOA bulletin board now displayed something new, a printed notice from the state auditor's office, stamped and official. The Willow Ridge Homeowners Association has been placed under temporary administrative oversight, pending re-election of a new governing board. Interim management will be handled by a resident advisory committee. That committee had elected Howard as chair, Lila as secretary, and, to my shock, they'd voted me in as compliance advisor. I'd refused at first, saying I didn't want to spend my days policing people's lawns. But Howard laughed and said, "That's exactly why we need you. Someone who knows what fairness actually looks like." We stopped by the community center, the same hall where Karen's empire had fallen. The banners were gone, replaced by simple folding tables and chairs. Inside, volunteers sorted through boxes of returned fines, refund checks, and restitution claims. Lila waved from behind a stack of folders. "Good news," she said. "The state ordered full reimbursement for every invalid fine issued under Karen's term. People are actually getting money back this week." Clara smiled faintly. "I never thought I'd see this place peaceful again." "Peaceful," I said, "but not perfect." I walked to the window, watching the reflection of the small crowd working together inside. Perfection was her illusion. This is better. Messy, human, real. Later that afternoon, we drove to St. Augustine's Medical Center. The hospital lobby buzzed with reporters again, but this time for something different. Near the elevators, a bronze plaque had been unveiled, polished and gleaming. The Marlowe Room. Dedicated to families who remind us that dignity and compassion are the foundation of care. The hospital director, a measured man in a navy suit, met us by the display. "You started something bigger than you realize, Ethan," he said. "We've restructured our donor system entirely. Every contribution now goes through double verification. No more loopholes, no more influence buying." Beside him, Miles stood quietly, hands folded. His career had survived, but the toll still showed in the creases around his eyes. "You gave me a second chance to do the right thing," he said. "I won't waste it." Clara squeezed my hand. "Neither will we." We went up to the maternity wing, passing the nurses who nodded warmly as we entered Suite 4A. Our room, finally. The same air system I'd installed years ago hummed softly, steady and reliable. The room wasn't fancy, but it was safe. That was all that mattered. She lay back on the bed, her hand tracing the edge of the blanket. "It feels strange," she whispered. "Being here without fear." I smiled. "That's the point." Outside the window, sunlight poured through the glass, spilling over the linoleum floor. It reflected off the small hospital crib waiting in the corner. Life, renewal, and justice all in one quiet moment. A nurse peeked in. "Mr. Marlowe, the hospital director asked if you'd say a few words for the dedication live stream. They're broadcasting the ceremony to the community." I hesitated, then nodded. Downstairs, the camera lights were bright, but the words came easily. "This room isn't about my wife or me," I said, my voice steady. "It's about what happens when ordinary people stop being silent. When one family stands up, others follow. We didn't defeat an HOA. We reminded it who it was supposed to serve." Applause followed, genuine and warm. Somewhere in that sound, the weight of the past months finally lifted. That night, as we drove home through the quiet streets of Willow Ridge, the porch lights glowed like stars. Every ramp, every imperfect garden, every patch of individuality shone brighter than it ever had before. Clara leaned against me, whispering, "It's over, isn't it?" I looked out the window at the neighborhood, reborn from its own silence. "Yeah," I said softly. "But what we built here, that's just beginning." If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now. Share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.